lecture organized by Heritage History Association under the aegis of IUTC, JDMC Memorial College.
Before we begin, I would like to request Professor Swati Pal to come forward and felicitate Professor R. Mahalakshmi with a token of gratitude. R. Mahalakshmi is Professor at the Center for Historical Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, where he has been teaching from 1999. The focus of his research is religious institutions, practices and beliefs in early India through an analysis of Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit, Tamil and Telugu sources. She is the author of The Making of the Goddess, Koravai Durga in the Tamil tradition, which was awarded the prize for the best book by a women historian by the Indian History Congress. Her other books include the Book of Lakshmi and an edited volume, Art and History, Text, Context, and Visual Representations in Ancient and Early Medieval India. She has also co-edited two books, The Economic History of India, Historiographical Issues and Perspectives, Essays in Honor of Ranveer Chakravarti, and Colonization, a Comparative Study of India and Korea, in addition to contributing articles in peer-reviewed journals and books. Professor Mahalakshmi has been visiting professor at the School of Visual Studies, Humboldt University, Berlin, Germany, and at the Faculty of Theology, also at the Humboldt University. The Faculty of Social Sciences, Kelaniya University, Sri Lanka, has invited her as a scholar in residence for 2 terms. She is member of the Senior Advisory Council of the South Asian Foundation for Academic Research, Kathmandu, Nepal, and also of the Sectoral Program Planning Group on History, India International Center, Delhi. She has served on boards of studies of several universities across India and also in the ICSE and other textbook committees, and has been nominated as sectional president by the Andhra Pradesh History Congress and Punjab History Congress. This year, she serves as the president of the Ancient India section of the Indian History Congress. Thank you, ma'am, for gracing us with the presence. Now, I request Principal Ma'am to felicitate our honorable guest, Ms. Vijay Nath, Doctor of Vijay.
Author of several books on theatre, creative and academic writing, and newspaper articles articulating her views on education. Her areas of research interest include performance studies and cultural history. She translates Hindi to English, and several of her translations have been published. She writes poetry, and her poems appear in several anthologies. She also has a collection entitled In Absentia and a curated collection called Living On. She is the Vice Chair of the Indian Association for Commonwealth Literature and Language Studies and has been the recipient of several national and international awards both as a teacher as well as an administrator. Now, I would like to invite Principal Ma'am to kindly address the session.
Good morning, everyone. Before I say anything, I would request all of us to please stand and maintain a minute's silence in memory of Prof. Vijay Nath. things that this particular lecture always reminds me of is the fact that it is so important to live a good life and to be remembered with the kind of love and warmth that Dr. Vijay Nath is remembered by. The very fact that unfailingly we have been holding this particular memorial lecture year after year is a recognition of the kind of person that Dr. Vijay Nath was. I don't like to use the word was, I like to use the word is, because I don't think that people who have given so much of themselves to the world can ever be absent. I think they are ever present. They live on in our hearts, they live on in the way we conduct ourselves, they live on in the kind of work we do, they live on in the way we behave, they live on in our attitudes, they live on in the grace. The one thing that I always remember Dr. Vijay Nath, the one word that I feel is synonymous with her is the word grace. I have yet to meet a person with as much grace as she had. And when I say grace, I don't just mean the way she appeared, because mind you, she appeared to be really beautiful. She was always properly attired. It was a pleasure to just look at her. So, and she took a lot of pride and pleasure, very simple childlike pleasure in the way she, in the way she dressed. But that's just a very, very small, perhaps not very significant part of the way in which we remember her for her grace. We remember her for her grace in the way she communicated with her students, in the way she communicated with her colleagues, in the way she communicated with the administration. She was soft-spoken, she was, she was peaceful, she was calm. I don't recollect a single moment where I saw her, getting into some kind of a flap or, getting upset about something. I'm sure she must have felt annoyed about a great many things, but it never ever showed on her face, it never ever showed in her demeanor. So we remember her for her grace. We remember her for the kind of teacher that she was. She was extremely devoted and she remained a learner, I think, till the end of her time. She was always curious, always thirsting for knowledge. So there's a lot that one has learned from Dr. Vijay Nath, and I remember her with a great deal of fondness. My interactions with her, unfortunately, were not perhaps as close as perhaps members of the history department, have had with her. But I do remember her stopping by to talk to people like me from another department, young people. Once upon a time, we were also young. So young people who joined the college at that time, and she always had a kind word, she always had advice to give. She was a true mentor, and that's the way I remember. So I can only say that the best way, I've said this umpteen times, the best way to remember a person we love is to be like that person, is to emulate that person. I hope we can all try to emulate Dr. Vijay Nath. Emulation is not always easy, but we can always set that as a benchmark, as a goal. I thank the History Department for continuing this very beautiful tradition. Memorialization is always a good thing. It keeps us, rooted. It makes us remember, and who better to do that than the History Department. So thank you so much, and I thank you, Mahalakshmi, for coming to
Thank you, Professor Pal, for sparing some time from your busy schedule. Now, I would like to request our teacher in charge, Professor Somana Gupta, to apprise the audience about Dr. Vijay.
Good morning, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to Professor Mahalakshmi, Mrs. Vijay Nath Professor Pal, to the 10th annual Dr. Vijay Nath Memorial Lecture, which is hosted by the History Department in the name of Dr. Nath. The late Dr. Nath was a very distinguished historian and cherished member of JDMC faculty, as Professor Pal has just said. As a specialist in ancient India, a primary research interest centered on Indian social structures, on which observations, and her Puranic literature. She authored 3 acclaimed books: Dan, Gift System in Ancient India, Puranas and Acculturation, an historical and anthropological perspective, and the Puranic World, Environment, Gender, Ritual, and Myth. In addition to these, she published numerous research papers in leading journals and anthologies. Dr. Nath's research brought a fresh perspective to the study of Puranas, shedding new light on the social changes occurring during the period of their composition. Her work emphasized the material context of the Puranic world, focusing on issues of environment, gender, ritual, and myth. She also highlighted the significant role the Puranas played in the process of acculturation within the subcontinent, especially during the Gupta period. Her contributions extended to an in-depth study of the ancient Dan or gift system, as explored in the monograph Dan gift system in ancient India, which was first published in 1987. In recognition of her scholarly achievements, Dr. Nath was elected sectional president of the Indian History Congress in 2001, and a presidential address was titled "From Brahmanism to Hinduism, Negotiating the Myth of the Great History." Her untimely passing deprived us not only of a brilliant historian, but also a very warm artist. In honor of her contributions to the study of ancient Indian history and her service to the college, the History Department instituted this Memorial Lecture in 2015, and as you can see, this is the 10th version of it. Over the years, we have had the privilege of hosting exceptional scholars for this lecture, and today we are honored to welcome Professor Mahalakshmi from the Center for Historical Studies, JDMC, to deliver a lecture of Women and Patriarchal Norms, Myths in the Early Puranas. Before I invite Professor Mahalakshmi, I will ask Mr. Vijay Nath Memorial Lecture and say a few words about Purana and the way her books. Because I remember one of her books, at least, she was working on when she was very ill, and she was on the bed. We went to meet her, and she was still working on that. So.
It's always such a pleasure to be here. 10th year of lectures, so it's been a journey. They seem to have flashed by. It's almost just yesterday since we started this series. Really missing Smita today, because she was the one who started it, and yeah, just missing her a lot. Janki Devi for me was a home away from home. My mother was here all the time, and so I studied in Springdale, and I spent a lot of time in college in this library, studying, reading, and so the vibe of this college to me is something really special. It speaks of home, and whenever I come back for these lectures, I'm really the memories of this thirst for knowledge, which was there then also, and which I see now also, is just so. It just brings back those years, and also tells me that there's also something that never dies when it comes to students' knowledge and their desire to know the world better, know our past better. So I'm really grateful to the college for continuing this. I think my mother would be, she was a student, as you very rightly said, and this just allows us to be in this journey together. And all of you historians, professors, you leave behind not just people, you just leave behind your intellectual work, your books. You're immortal, I feel. As someone who's not in the profession at all, really appreciate the kind of dedication and passion that you have. Not going to keep you away from Dr. Mahalakshmi, but thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much for giving this chance to learn once again the best minds how they are thinking about our past and history. And on behalf of my family, my father is not able to come, and my sister, really thank all of you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, it is my honor to invite our esteemed guest speaker, Professor R. Mahalakshmi, to enlighten us on today's lecture topic of women and patriarchal norms.
the Dr. Vijay Nath Memorial Lecture. I thank the principal, Professor Swati, Professor Payal Nagpal, the IQAC coordinator, Professor Soumya Gupta, teacher in charge, and Dr. Natasha Naumani, association in charge, for having me here. I would also like to thank Ms. Nidhi Srinivas, Dr. Vijay Nath's daughter, for being here, colleagues at the Department of History, many of whom I know very well, and here I must pause and say that this is a department that has seen some of the most illustrious scholars. Professor Kumkum Srivastava is sitting here, and there are so many more, so many others who have been part of this department. And I'm very happy to see that the younger generations that have come to this department are equally, very engaged with their research. And I'm really very happy to be a part of this gathering today and to have all of them over here. So thank you to the colleagues at the Department of History. Thank you, students and friends who have gathered over here. I will speak in a bit about why I think Dr. Vijay Nath's scholarship remains exemplary in terms of her analysis of historical sources, her sound methodology, and her intricate framing of historical context, because this is very, very important. It's not just enough to know your source. So, people say things like, इनको संस्कृत नहीं आती है, बस संस्कृत जानो तो सब कुछ जानते हैं. I work on South India. I work with Sanskrit sources, with Pali sources, Prakrit sources, and Tamil sources. And on occasion, I work with Telugu sources as well. So, we do know, historians do have to cover a lot of ground. And yes, you do need the expertise to cover it by knowing the language. But knowing the language by itself is not enough. You need to have the historian's craft. That is something that is increasingly missing today. Or at least there seems to be an assumption that is circulating, a commonsensical assumption, that all you need to know is, एक ऋग्वेद का translation देख लो, and we know what is there in the ऋग्वेद. हो सकता है जो translation English में ना हो, हिंदी में हो या कोई और भाषा में, but वो काफी है. No. How the Rigveda is composed, what is the structure of the Rigveda? You cannot understand it by just reading the text. And this is what Dr. Vijay Nath's scholarship presented to us. That mastery over sources, but also the mastery over the historian's craft. Knowing how to place the source within a historical context. Unraveling that context. कि किस तरह का सोसाइटी था जिसमें इस तरह के ideas prevalent थे. That these kinds of views that were presented in these sources, how did they imagine? What was the purpose? What was it aimed at? These were some of the things that really stand out in her wonderful scholarship. But before I talk about that, let's first talk about why women and patriarchy. Often people say that it's a visa bita hai. Why do we have to keep talking about women, about patriarchy, and so on? And here, I'd like to start with this very beautiful poem by Mahalakshmi. प्रिय, मैं हूँ एक पहेली थी, जितना मधुर हास, जितना मद तेरी चितवन में, जितना क्रंदन, जितना विषाद, जितना विष जग के स्पंदन में, पीट में चिर दुख प्यास बनी, सुख सरदा की रंगरेली, मेरी प्रतिरोमों से अविरत झरते हैं निर्झर और आग, करती विरक्ति आसक्ति प्यार, मेरे श्वासों में जाग जाग. प्रिय, मैं सीमा की गोद भरी, पर हूँ असीम से खेली. The translation is up there for you, where Varma talks about how that she has taken in so much of nectar, the sweet laughter, intoxication in the glance of the Priya. The Priya could be a person, it could be the
Almighty. She was, I will just mention that she was one of the foremost exponents of the Chayavad tradition. And so there is that mystical element in her writing. But one of the very important things that she ends with, which I find so wonderful, is that you can limit me within a certain radius, but I still yearn to go out of that limit. I want to touch that which is limitless. This is something that women, poets, scholars, historians have been talking about for at least the past 2 centuries, when it has been possible for them to find a space to write, to express themselves. It's not that in pre-modern traditions women did not write, but they were very few and far between. And what they wrote often appears to be mediated by others. Professor Kumkum Roy, who has worked on the Therigatha, has talked about this at length, that when you actually look at the way in which these poetic compositions, wonderful poetic compositions, they are composed by bhikkhunis, by women who have entered into the Sangha. Yeah? And in many ways they are very personal in the kinds of the views that they are expressing over there, where women are saying, no, I had to get away from the household. Chula Chakki Wala, you actually find that kind of expression in the poems in the Therigatha. I don't want to anymore be tied to the mortar and the pestle. I don't want to be tied to this man, this horrible man, who keeps lying outside on his cot and whiles away his time while I'm doing all the work. These are the women's voices that we find there. But as Kumkum Roy has shown, the actual compilation, the editing, and the presenting of these poems itself is happening at a much later date. So there is mediation that is happening. It is possible that there were other poems. It is possible that there is an editing. We all know what editing does to our work. One word here and there for ancient historians. एक diacritical mark, यहाँ से वहाँ diacritical marks is जब दीर्घ बोलना होता है या any other the soft and the hard consonant difference that you want to show, we know what can happen if that is gone from the work. So it's possible that there is some editing that is taking place. The point is that there are some works written by women, but they are very few. There are also very few instances where there is a critique of social life as the women were seeing it. The Therigatha is really exceptional in that sense for giving us that kind of critique. Now, so what really is I was trying to draw attention to is that women like Mahalakshmi were really drawing our attention to the fact that definitely in the 19th and 20th century, the condition of women was quite deplorable. There were all kinds of limitations. And Mahadevi Varma was one of those who tried to go back into history. Veera was a great inspiration for her. And she actually thinks or understands that it is the Hindu tradition that we have to look at critically to understand why the condition of women is what it is. And she writes this very interesting work, Hindu Stree Ki Patnitva, where she critiques this idea of the woman as the wife, which is what apparently she is being groomed for from her birth. The birth of the woman is so that she can perpetuate the line of a man, the family into which she is married. So it is in that sense that these women really draw our attention to this issue, the woman question, as it has been referred to by feminist scholars. Around the same time as Mahadevi Varma, you have Simone de Beauvoir, who, no, look at this. but Simone de Beauvoir, in her work The Second Sex, who talks about how it is not enough to look at the economic inequalities, the material transformations in society because of which women may have been subordinated. Now, this is an argument that had been postulated by Friedrich Engels in his wonderful thin pamphlet book, which is on family, private property, and the state. In that book, Engels talks about how it is the world historic defeat of women when mother right is overturned in prehistoric times. मतलब मातृसत्ता जो है, the line of women where women had command in society, they had control over social resources and material resources. That was a time that was very far off in the prehistoric times, but at some point the understanding of value of objects and the institution of private property. Private property is an institution. It's not just something so simple. It's not just ye mera pen hai, hamara hairband hai, and so on. When we talk about private property, it has an institutional base, and that is the point when patriarchy sets foot in human society. Now, Simone de Beauvoir says, yes, it is a very valid point, but that is not the only point. How is it that even when women have access to resources, they still do not have control in society? Or if they have control in society, it is mediated through the men in their household, through the family, and so on. Now, in the 19th century itself, you have Pandita Ramabai, who is also known as Pandita Ramabai Saraswati, because she was supposed to be so learned in the Sanskrit texts, the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, that is the Bhagavad Purana. Apparently, she could just recite verses from these, at her brain, that she could have an entire chapter, adhyay, that is presented. And she was invited across the world, and especially in India, she was felicitated in many places, and she was given this title of Saraswati in Calcutta. She wrote The High Caste Hindu Woman in 1887, where she drew attention to the way in which women were subjugated, were subordinated in Indian society, and she also located the root of that subordination in the Brahmanical Hindu tradition. Other people like the Sri Purana, who wrote in Marathi. Other people also, in fact, before Pandita Ramabai itself, a couple of years before, you have this wonderful work which is talking about the Sri Purana, saying why is it that women and men are not equal in society? Again, going back into history. So it is in this sense that we as historians have also entered into the field. Yeah? We have been directed by, of course, the gaze of those who came before us, but equally we have been directed by the discipline itself. Because when we talk about history, we are talking about men and women in history. However, largely, her story gets marginalized, it gets invisibilized, and the manner in which the issues or the aspects related to history are taken up, that itself means that women may be absent. So the absence that we see of women in history is twofold. One is that the sources themselves may be negligible, there may be a very small number of sources, but the other aspect or the second dimension is when historians, because we have focused only on certain kinds of issues, we have have ended up not paying attention to women in history, women as agents in history. Now, pioneering work was done in the Indian context by scholars like Larry Spader, Eileen Horner. In fact, it's primarily the Buddhist tradition that people concentrated on because, as I mentioned already, the Therigatha was there. We believe that at least some of the poems in the Therigatha were composed during the time of the Buddha, 6th, 5th centuries BC, and that others may have been composed later, but also that the final redaction, as I've said, only happens a millennium later, around the 5th century AD, 1000 years later. You are having the compilation of things that is taking place. But nevertheless, they were there, and they were being seen and read by these scholars who therefore talked about women, women's place, women's roles in history, particularly in the history of this wonderful religious tradition that they were talking about, which was Buddhism. We also have A.S. Albekar's pioneering work, which talked about the position of women in Indian history. And in Albekar's work, he draws our attention to the women seers who are mentioned in the Vedic literature. We have the reference to Gargi, to Maitreyi, the Brahmavadinis, the ones who could engage in debate, which showed their knowledge, which showed the kind of grasp that they had. Pandita Ramabai Saraswati was a Brahmavadini of the 20th century. So you had that kind, but she repudiates that also. But you had that kind of, that section of women that was there. Only 2 or 3 that we can name, but nevertheless they were there. That Albekar draws our attention to. And this is what later scholarship on history, on social history, and on women's history has talked about as the referencing of women worthies, only looking at those who are seen as great women. Now, women is a very broad category. It's not a homogeneous category. There is so much that cuts across women in society in terms of caste distinctions, class hierarchies, regional differences that may be there. So in this sense, what we're looking at is that heterogeneity was often getting subsumed under the category of women as a homogeneous category, which is what Albekar and others were doing. And scholars then began to critique this kind of an idea, and starting from R.S. Sharma, who first brings in the issue of how women, as well as Shudras, in the Brahminical literature especially, but also to some extent in the Pali and the Prakrit literature, they were clubbed together and they were seen as marginal to society. They were seen as those that had to be bound and kept under the thumb. There are instances that R.S. Sharma cites where the binding of the cow and the binding of the woman are talked of together. And so you have that, the socio-economic framework or context within which we look at women, how women, the masses of women, were structurally placed in such a manner that many of them may not have had much agency, just like many men also would not have had much agency except for the elites. And therefore that we needed to focus on the reasons for the subordination, which is where the idea of political economic subordination, the state and economic resources, the control over economic resources is what leads to different levels of subjection and servitude, and women also therefore are subjected to this. It is in the work of Uma Chakrabarti, Kumkum Roy, and later Shahi Shah, a number of important issues. It also brought up some wonderful scholarship on the woman question, which tries to look at the historical basis for women's identities as we see them in the early modern and modern period. And drawing upon that kind of work then, scholars started focusing on questions related to the affective domain, the family, looking at the issue of household, the smallest unit of society, which is the household, where economic activities take place, but also it is not just economic activities. There are multiple relationships that are forged within the household, and this is what they draw our attention to. And especially within the household, you have some women who are not related by blood to the members of the family. The family, the kin group, they are related by blood, but you also have a significant section that is not related by blood. These are the dasis. And that's why Uma Chakravarti says, what happened to the Vedic dasi? We keep talking about the great women when we are talking of the Vedas, but there are also innumerable mentions of dasis. Now, this is what I mean by talking about the gaze of the historian. Once that gaze has sharpened and has focused on such questions, then we find actually our sources are abundant. We just haven't looked well enough. So it is with this kind of scholarship then that the idea of cultural construction, of ideas, of values, of institutions, even that institution of marriage, the kind of ideological construct of marriage, why marriage is so important, how a woman is not fulfilled. So it's not just the Manu comes and says, you have to get married. Manu is writing at a later point of time. Even before that, you have texts, the later Vedic literature, even in the later part of the Rigveda, you have this famous marriage hymn of Surya, the daughter of Surya, where it is described in great detail how this marriage is going to happen, how the father has tied the girdle around the waist of the daughter is now untying that girdle. And what does he do? He gives it in the hands of her husband. So this kind of an association that we have of marriage being something that is very central to the life of a woman. Does it mean that it's not central to the life of a man? Obviously not. It was central to the life of men as well. But the manner in which it is seen as central to the life of a woman is very different from the way in which it is presented for men. For instance, in the Vedic tradition, you have reference to how there are these three fires that are very important that have to be maintained by the man. Yeah? So you have the ritual fire, you have the sacrificial fire, and then you have the Gardapatya, which is the household fire. Now the man, we are told, cannot have a household without the Gardapatya for more than 3 days. In other words, the Gardapatya can be wiped out or diminished for only 3 days. And why will it be wiped out or diminished? When the wife dies. Now we don't have anything similar for the men. If the man dies, the woman is not enjoined to keep the Gardapatya. Right? So the way in which then the cultural dimension, the ideological dimension Then as you have the Vedic corpus expanding, when you have texts like the Brahmanas, what are the Brahmanas? The Brahmanas are actually telling you how to perform a ritual. But even there you have such categorization that is made. And what are these categorizations? These are not just simple words or terms. They have a conceptual depth to them. And what is that conceptual depth that is being conveyed when we use a binary like pativrata and kulata? The pativrata being one who is devoted to her husband, the kulata being the opposite, being a loose woman, not under the control of a man. So the values, the ideological positioning that is coming through in such ideas. The other thing that comes up is the issue of something that is intrinsic to women. This is referred to in the Sanskrit text as Swaha. And in the Pali text also you find mention of this as Iti Bhava. And what is this Iti Bhava? The Iti Bhava is that women are chanchala. They are agruva. They don't stay in one place. They're just jumping around. You know, the meaning of these terms, they're in Hindi also, and in other languages. So they don't stay around. They pickle. They need to be tied down. Even the goddess Lakshmi, so important, Shri Lakshmi, who comes out of the Samudra Manthana, even she is chanchal. And therefore she has to be controlled. And so first, Indra tries to go and control her. And how does he control her? By using Bala. I don't want to elaborate on that. But it's a very interesting way in which the myths convey that even goddesses are not exempt. If they are not within the bonds or bounds of institutions, then even they can be subjected to certain forms of behavior. The other thing that we find is the idea of Stri Dharma. And often enough in the text, particularly in the Puranas, you have reference to the Stri Dharma. Let me just go back to Iti Bhava. In the Theri Gatha, the women poets themselves are saying this about their Stri Bhava, Iti Bhava. That we are, in this difficult position because of our Iti Bhava. And we need to overcome it. And Tathagata has shown us the way to come out of it. The Buddha has shown us the way to come out of it by following this noble path. Now, the Sri Dharma is invariably, especially in the Dharma Shastra and in the Puranic literature, associated with Pativrata Dharma. And so, all the narratives we find, and whether this is in the epics or in the Purans, they are about how women who have upheld Sri Dharma are basically the Pativratas. And the other thing then that comes up in the Sanskrit text of the first millennium CE, towards the end of the first millennium CE, particularly in the Dharma Shastras like Manu, you have the idea of what are considered the 8 forms of marriages, 4 of which are Mangala and 4 of which are Amangala. And there's a gradation of these marriage forms and so on. Now, scholars like Srimani have argued that if we were to critically look at the way in which these classifications are done, we may actually be looking at the way in which local practices of men and women cohorting together without the institution of marriage are now being presented as amangala, inauspicious. And this is indicated of the Brahmanical attempt to assimilate these communities, these groups which have alternate social lives, alternate social customs and cultural customs. So it's in that sense that we have this kind of this kind of injunction on what is to be followed and what is not to be followed. And then within marriage itself, the idea of Kanyadana as being of supreme importance, the handing over of the girl to the man, and the pani grahana, the holding of the hand of the woman. These are then ideas also that get valued. And so, in many instances, even in the most radical poetry, for instance, the Tamil poet Andai, beautiful erotic poetry that she is writing about her love for Lord Ranganathan. And what is she saying in her poetry? She wants to be held by the hand. She wants to marry Lord Ranganathan. She wants sexual union, but she wants absolute union. And that she sees as happening when she is married to the Lord. So these are the ways in which then ideologies play on the way in which women's identities are presented, and they are also accepted, they are circulated and accepted in society. As we tell these stories about the great women, we find that people respond to it, see it as something that is worthy of emulation. So in a lot of these stories, there's a moral at the end of it. And that moral is in the form of saying that, see, because these women stayed within the Lakshman Rekhas, within the limits that were set for them, this is what they gain as the fruits of their actions, of their devotion. And those women who stepped out, these are obviously their just deserts. They deserve what they got. The next one, please. Now, coming to the Puranas themselves as historical sources. As many of you know, the Puranas are very, very complex texts. They are believed to have been composed somewhere between the 3rd century CE to broadly the 10th century CE, although many of them have additions of the medieval period as well. Going up to the 16th century, there are these fake Purans like Bhavishya Puran and so on. But where you have Queen Victoria was talked of in the Bhavishya Puran. But the main Purans, what we talk of as the Mahapurans, they are 18 in number, and we find many Purans like the Padma Puran and all giving you the names of these Purans. And the main content that is there may broadly have been put together by the 10th century age. Although there are scholars like R.C. Hazra, pioneering scholar who is little detailed at these texts, who would say that there was something called the original Puran. Those Purans have been lost, and these are actually replacement of those Purans which are using the names but which have a completely new content. Anyway, without going into that, then R.C. Hazra also draws attention to the way in which the Purans actually are composed apparently in a time of great flux. Why? Because the Purans are all talking about Kali Yuga. Of late, everybody seems to be very concerned about whether we are in Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, who came when, and so on. But the Puranikas were very concerned about the Kali Yuga, because they said we have arrived at the Kali Yuga. And what is this Kali Yuga? This Kali Yuga is when Brahmins are not being given their danas and dakshinas. They are not being looked after by people. Second thing, Shudras are rising above their rank. They are becoming far too important in society. And the third thing, women are no longer staying within bounds. So they have some very real concerns, those who are composing the Puranas, and Kali Yuga is used as a trope. It is used as a way of conveying that there is imbalance in society. That imbalance may be real or imagined. That imbalance may be in the minds of the people who are composing. It may also be that those who are composing are issuing this as a warning कि अगर आप लोग हमको दान नहीं देंगे, पुराणों को जो बना रहे हैं, जो composers हैं, that if they are not going to be supported by society, and by society primarily they are aiming at kings, then there will be this kind of imbalance and chaos, and that chaos is what they are drawing attention to, and that is why then the Purans are also very careful in not merely giving the genealogies of the gods and the sages, the Vamshas. They also give a Vamshanucharita, which is the genealogies of the kings. So the context, when we talk of a text or texts like the Purans, we need to think of the context, right? So this is something that is very striking and is brought out by R.C. Hazra. And other scholars like D.D. Kosambi and N.N. Bhattacharya then look at the myths. Kosambi not merely at the Purans, takes a wider view, but N.N. Bhattacharya in particular in his work has looked at a number of myths from the Purans to try and unravel the historical elements. Myth is not history. Myth, the Akhyanas, the Kathas, all of these that are there in various texts, they are a society's way of preserving a memory which is not necessarily a historical memory. It is some kind of an understanding of the kind of world that they inhabit, and also a world view which includes an understanding of the cosmos. So there are cosmological dimensions, there are cosmogonic dimensions. The origin of the universe itself is something that becomes very important. And you can see that's why the idea of the egg, the cosmic egg, the golden egg, these are ideas then that come through in the Purans, through the myths. And then who is it who is supposed to ensure that the memory of the cosmic egg and the origin of the cosmos is maintained, is kept? The king. The king by performing the Hiranyagarbha dana. And who are the recipients of the dana? The Brahmanas. Right? So you have a whole structure there that is being created through such texts, where a certain kind of ideology is being presented. That ideology is suited to a specific context, which is where then the wonderful work of Vijay Nath comes in, where in her work Puranas and Acculturation, which was published in 2001, the same year that she was sectional president of the Indian History Congress, that she brings in this important dimension, that this context of the Puranas that we are looking at is one where there is change and transformation, there is flux. What is the reason for that flux? The reason is the migration and settlement of Brahmanas and Brahmanical society, not just Brahmanas, their way of life. So there could be other groups also who are going into these areas. So the Brahmanical way of life into newer areas. And these newer areas are those, as B.D. Chattopadhyay has argued, where state formation is occurring for the first time. In other words, there is a transformation of a tribal society into a settled state society, and it is in that context then that the Puranas are being composed, and it is therefore understandable why the Puranas are such a mess. This is such a messy corpus that you find in several Puranas, but yet the manner of rendering of these stories becomes very different. In the different Puranas, you might have some additional elements that are added and so on. So there is a difference then in the way in which the myths themselves are being transmitted. But the core of the myths remain the same, and that is what then other scholars have talked about. But coming back to Vijay Nath, she draws our attention to some very, very important points. The first is that Puranas were not composed by a single hand. There were several hands that were involved in the composition of the Purans. They were not really at a particular point of time, but over a period of time. And she identifies 3 levels at which the Puranic compositions take place. Now the term Vyasa is one that we have all heard, right? We know of Veda Vyasa. Now looking carefully at the way in which Vyasa itself is mentioned in earlier literature as well as in the Puranic literature. Now in the Puranic literature, Vijay Nath points out that in the Purva Puran, Vyasas, 27 different Vyasas are mentioned. So they have a prefix to their name to which you can understand that they are different people. Like Manu. Manu is a name you will find frequently mentioned. Right? You have a Swayambhu Manu, Vaishnav Manu, and so on. So you have many such Manus. So the Purva Puran mentions 27 and there are 58 that are mentioned in the Vayu Puran and the Vishnu Puran. Meaning that it's not one specific Vyasa that is being referred to, not even the mythical Veda Vyasa, but possibly there's a class or category of Brahmins who were very well versed in Vedic and other kinds of lore, who were the arrangers of these compositions. And the second thing is, second level at which this was happening was in a particular lineage of Brahmanas who also play a very important role in compiling the Mahabharata. The Bhargava Brahmins. They are instrumental in the final redaction and compilation of the Mahabharata. Their hand is also known over here. And the third level at which the compilation is happening is in the hands of the Sutas and the Magadhas. These are the bards. We know of them having a high status in the Vedic times, in the Vedic literature, but we also know in post-Vedic times that gradually their status is diminishing. They are not considered Brahmanas, and invariably in the Dharma Shastras they are thought of as the progeny of the unacceptable unions. Yeah. So you have the Anuloma and the Pratiloma. So these are the unacceptable unions that they are the progeny of. So that's the very important point that she draws our attention to. And the second is about how you can actually see from the frequent mention of the names of tribes like Pulitas, Vishalas and so many others, that tribes were being assimilated and were being Brahmanized. So what M. Srinivasa, sociologists, talk of as a Sanskritization process, as historians we talk of it as the acculturation process that is taking place. Then she talks about the belief systems and also about the methods of communication that the Puranas are presenting us with. These very interesting ways in which there are stories within stories that are there. Already the Mahabharata is providing us with one such, a compendious example. But here you have numerous Puranas, and within each of these Puranas, within an Adhyaya, you can have multiple stories that are being narrated. Now, as far as women in the Puranas are concerned, Vijay Nath does comment on the issue or the woman question, and in her second work, published in 2009, I believe it was after very frontally been addressed as historical sources. These are very recent works, and in some ways they are not really saying anything very different from what Vijay Nath is saying. I think that's a very important point to see how pioneering the work of Vijay Nath is. And in Jayatyagi's and Monica Sacsena's work, Jayatyaги focuses on one Mahapurana, the Matsya Mahapurana, and Monica Sacsena looks at five. I think Matsya, Markandeya, Vishnu, Bhagavata Purana, and one more. I'm sorry, I can't remember, but one more. So you have these five. These are some early Puranas that Monica Sacsena looks at. Now, in both of these, what are the issues that they are talking about? The issues are that for Jayatyaги, something that is very interesting about the Puranas is they seem to be giving some space to women. Now, Vijay Nath actually comments on this, although she doesn't develop this argument. What is that space that is being given to women? The space is in the form of rituals that they can perform that are called vratas. So these vratas are mentioned. There are several hundreds of vratas. I think there's an estimated 25,000 verses of vratas or something like that. I may get the numbers wrong. Excuse me if I do. But it's really a huge number of vratas that are there. And women are told that they can perform these vratas themselves. And it's not just married women. It's not just a pativrata. There are even vratas for the ganta. There are even vratas for widows that are mentioned. There are even vratas for unmarried women that are mentioned over here. So this is a very interesting dimension that was looked at by Jayatyaги. And in Monica Sacsena's work, really it's a more comprehensive work, it's more recent also. What we find is that she looks at a way in which, through access to material resources, one of the things that Vijay Nath talks about, through the family and the household, women's place as seen in these Puranas, their connection to men, both within the family and outside of the family, and where does that render them? How does it render them? This is something that she also brings out in her work, and of course she also talks about ritual spaces and performance. Now, the spaces that these scholars have talked about are very important for us to recognize. As Gramsci has said, when we talk about hegemony, when we talk about the hegemonic hold of ideology of any kind, it can be of a kind where somebody says it is okay to go and kill that person because I think that person is doing wrong. What is the wrong? Maybe it's the way he or she dresses. Maybe it is the kind of food he or she eats. This is the hold of ideology. It's not just an individual, a madman or a crazy person who is doing this. It is the hold of ideology that makes people, that pushes people into these kinds of actions. Right? So, Gramsci draws our attention to the fact that when we talk of ideology, we are looking at, of course, the coercive apparatuses. And the state is the one who wields the coercive apparatus. But the state, as Kumkum Roy showed in her work on origins of monarchy in ancient India, Kumkum Roy places a lot of emphasis on the household and the family as being very integral to the assertion of state power by looking at various kinds of texts. In other words, from that family through various intermediate levels up to the state, you have agencies that are there that will enforce that certain norms of behavior, of practice are being followed. Certain rules and regulations. So the coercive authority, when we say, we are actually talking something that is punitive, that can be exercised or on a person. So in Hammurabi's code that was issued in the second millennium BC in Mesopotamia, over there it is said that if a woman, a prostitute, if she behaves like a family woman, even there, as far back as the second millennium, third millennium BC, you have these kinds of ideas that are prevalent. And there he says, if she behaves like that, then her hair should be shaved off. Tar should be applied to her head. And she should be paraded on the streets sitting on her donkey. So, punitive measures. There the state comes in. But as we know, we have quasi-states in the form of communities. A community will decide. So we don't need the state to come and say you are not dressing properly. This kind of sexuality that you are expressing is criminal. You can have a community also comes in and lynch a person, kill that person, because they have the backing of the coercive authority of the state. So it's in that sense that when we talk of hegemony, then we look at the coercive authority, but we also look at the ideological apparatuses that are there in society. And religion, as well as non-religious elements, can be part of that ideological apparatus that is prevalent. And when we talk of these ideological apparatuses, then institutions like marriage, like family, I mean, we don't want to talk about love. The affective domain, we always say, let's keep something that is special, separate, and personal. But even love, it has been shown by various scholars in early times as well as today, can be regulated. Okay? You cannot marry so and so. You belong to the same village. You belong to the same Gotra. No, there is a war against our women. Therefore, you cannot marry. So we have to have those Lakshman Rekhas so that our women are not going out. So ideological state apparatuses are all about this. How to convey these ideas to people at large in society, and through that then have these become part of the dominant mainstream culture, even if those who are accepting these ideologies are not going to benefit from it. So we all, my children used to be very upset when they were school going because I did not teach some drugs, which is a very big thing in North India. Time is up with you. Anyway, so I used to be told by my children, look, my teacher is saying it's very bad that your mother doesn't keep this drug. She should. And so on, because I think they were having a discussion in class. So my 5-year-old or 6-year-old son came and said, Mama, what you're doing is very bad. You shouldn't be like this. You should be a good mama. You should go and do this for daddy and so on. So the way in which ideology takes a hold on our minds and in our lives is something then that becomes very important when we are looking at the myths, the narratives that are there. When we look at regulations, when we look at the Shastric kind of injunctions, and the Puranas, by the way, have a lot of that kind of material, the Shastric material. It says, do this, don't do this. But of them, I thought I would choose 2 or 3 to talk about. Where the idea of Pativrata Dharma is taught. And what is this Pativrata Dharma? Now, in one of the stories, I'm not going to do the usual stories, maybe 1 or 2, but this is a little unusual. This is a story of the Daruvala, the tree covered forest, where sages are performing this very great yajna in honor of Shiva. Now, Shiva wants to go in front of these sages and show them. We shouldn't forget the Puranas are religious texts. Okay, that's the most important part. We shouldn't forget that they are sectarian theistic texts in honor of Vishnu and Shiva primarily, and then later on you have Devi also, who is brought in the form of Shakti into the Puranic literature. But this one is dedicated to Shiva, the Veda Purana, as the name itself indicates. And so Shiva wants to show the sages, the munis, the rishis, that what is the point of these sacrifices? What should happen is that only know me. Right? And so he goes into this Daruvala. And he goes in an agyat manner. He goes in a disguise. And what is that disguise? He goes in this Vikrita Rupa. In this very, strange kind of appearance. And he is Dikvasa. He's naked, he's Nanda. And then he's also like a Manda fellow, he's like going very slowly, walking over there. And he also has this smita, he has this smile that is there on his face. No matter that he looks very dark and strange, the women who are there in the forest, both in the ashram and outside the ashram. This is very interesting. It's one of the few instances where there is a distinction that is being made. We don't know who those other women are, but they do say the Brahmana women and other women. And so all the women who are there in the forest, there are some apparently who are living on trees. They are also climbing down as soon as they see him, following him, and without them knowing it also, their pallas are slipping, their cloth is falling from their bodies. Very ashleen behavior, basically, of these women, not Pativratas at all. And so, of course, the sages get mad about it when they realize that this is happening. And that too, when they see that Vikrita Rupa chap, and the same, I'm sure that is also part of it, that what is this? And they're very angry and they drive away this chap and abuse him. Shiva disappears from there. And then the rishis find that there is no phalan only coming from their sacrifice. They are not able to kindle the fire only. So, what is the reason? They try everything and then they can't, they go to Brahma, Lord Brahma, who is supposed to be the creator of the universe, and they go to him and they say that, this has happened, what shall we do? And Brahma then finds out the full story and he says, Mudhas, he actually uses the word, that don't you know a guest, an atithi, no matter in what form that he comes to your home, you should invite him and give him all the honors. In every which way you should honor the guy. And that is the true Grihastha Dharma. That is the true Dharma of the Brahmana also, that he says. And then Brahma goes on to give another story. And what is this other story? The story is about Sudarshan. This Brahmin, very pious Brahmin, who was a great devotee of Shiva. And when he gets married, he tells his wife that the greatest He actually says it. I have the Sanskrit verses. He actually says, "Ki, I don't want all this. What I come for is something else. You have to give yourself to me." And that lengthy daन that he is asking for, that is then achieved. So the lady initially is shy, but then she remembers her husband's words and she goes with him and so on. And then you have Sudarshana coming back to the house. He comes to the door of the house and he says, "I've come, where are you?" He's calling out to his wife. And before she can answer, the Aditi answers, "She's with me, I'm having sex with her." He uses the word Maithuna. So, Maithuna is a term that is used in Sanskrit to refer to sexual intercourse. And so that I'm having sex with her, it was very good and I am satisfied. That also he says. Okay? And then Sudarshana says, "Okay, so shall I go away?" And the Aditi says, "No, I've finished. You can come in." And then when he comes in, the Aditi reveals his true form to be Shiva. And he says, "Because you are such a great devotee, I'm going to test you. This is the correct way in which a devotee should be. A Brahmin Grahastha should be willing to give everything that he has to the Aditi, and that the wife also remains a pativrata. Why? Because I have not enjoyed her with my mind, Manasa. And therefore she remains pure and chaste. She remains yours." Okay? Now, why I wanted to use this story is we have a lot of stories which are talking about the pativratas who are doing whatever the husband wants and so on, who are willing to give up their lives. But it's a little rarer for us to find these kinds of stories. Invariably, when you see what is the pativrata dharma, it is to led to the grihastha dharma of the man, and that grihastha dharma involves also showing certain kinds of behavior and hospitality towards others of the same social status. Now, this grihastha dharma is not offered to those of the Vaishya Varna or even Kshatriya Varna or Shudra Varna. It is only for the Brahman that this kind of Atithi Bhava is shown. And so it is within that social class that you have certain ways of showing that you belong to the same class that is presented. Stephanie Jameson, in this wonderful work looking at the later Vedic and post-Vedic literature, talks of how the sacrificer's wife, now in the Vedic, the sacrifice is most important. The Yajamana is performing the sacrifice. And his wife is also the sacrificed wife. Why? Because she is necessary for the sacrifice in a secondary way, but she is also necessary in the non-ritual sphere, because those who are invited, the Vipras, the Rishis who are invited to the sacrifice, they have to be satisfied in any and every which way. And that is where we first find mention of this as part of the dharma of the woman, of the married woman. Right? So you find this coming into a story like this, which is talking about Shiva Bhakti. We are no longer talking about sacrifice. We are talking about devotional religion, very different kind of religion. But even there you have certain normative ideas about how the woman is completely under the control of her husband, or is meant to serve the husband in any and every which way, even if it means that she has to give her body to another person. The other interesting myth that you find not just in this, in many of the Puranas, is the story of Dhruva. We all know Dhruva Tara, the star which is fixed up in the sky. Now, how does he get fixed in the sky? In the Linga Purana, we have reference to this myth. And what this myth is also underscoring for us, again, it's something we know very well from the Vedic through the epic literature, that polygyny is something that is quite normal, especially amongst the Kshatriya class also know that Brahmin men were polygynous. How? We have the famous instance of Yagyavalkya with Maitreyi and Katyayani, right? The two wives. So we know that upper caste, they had a polygynous household, more than one wife. And in this story of Dhruva, we find that Dhruva wants to go and sit on the lap of his father. He is the son of the chief queen, the Mahishi, who is supposed to have a very important role in all public ceremonies and on public occasions. But the kings also had their own favorite queen, who was the Bhavata, and then you had that queen who was not very favored. So you had gradation amongst these women who were part of the family and household. And this boy who was the son of the Mahishi tries to sit, and the Bhavata, Suruchi, pushes him off the lap of the father and goes and sits, makes her son sit on the lap. Now this boy is very distraught, and the mother then calms him down and says, you go and pray to Lord Shiva, and he will make sure that you get greater fruits than this. The highest form of fruits you will get through that worship, much beyond what you are seeking now. So he goes, he performs penance and so on. And at the end of it, he is given the boon that he will go and become a star. But not merely that, his mother will also go with him. Now, this is a very interesting myth to me because in the Puranas, you have frequent references, like in the Vedic literature, to the birth of the male child being coveted. Kumkum Roy, in her presidential address to the Indian History Congress, focused on this theme. This Putreshti Yagyas that are being performed, which are primarily for male progeny. So it is the kings who are performing this in a patrilineal state monarchical system. It's very important to have a male child. But also in the Brahmanical culture overall, you find that this is something that is over and over repeated. And in the Putreshti, there are daughters also that are being born. It's not that the daughters are missing completely, but the birth of the daughter is always to benefit either the family of the father or that of the household into which she will go once she is married. So in the case of Savitri, we know that in the Savitri Kathas that are there in the Matsya Purana and in other Puranas, even earlier in the Mahabharata, but one of the boons she asks of Yamdev is that her father should be given sons. She asks for her father-in-law that his kingdom should be restored to him. And then only she asks for the life of her husband. That too, how does she say it? Not by asking directly. She says, I may have 1,000 sons through this man. And that is how then the man has to be revived. Right? So this, the way in which this idea of the son being coveted, son being imported, is something that is presented through the myth is there. And the falan of it, that the mother, look at the mother, she also gets a place amongst the stars. This is something that is mentioned over here. I will go to the second last of the myths that I want to talk about, which is of Kali, because it is not just women, the myths about women, the sages or the kings and their wives that tell us about certain dominant tropes about gender, but there are also stories about the goddesses and the gods which are telling us about certain ideals of femininity and masculinity. And this myth in the Linga Purana is a very, very important myth because it talks about a demon called Daruka, an asura called Daruka, who cannot be killed by anybody except a woman, it is said. And so the gods come to Shiva and Parvati, and Shiva asks Parvati to provide a rupa or Shakti, and Parvati don't want this Kali. So all the gods, all the people, all the sages, they go to first Brahma, then Vishnu, then Shiva, and they say, help us. And Shiva says, okay, let me find a solution. So he goes to that place, it's a forest, where Kali is still going on that rampage looking for all kinds of things to devour. And there, Shiva takes the form of a child. A little child who is lying on the floor of the forest, and he starts crying. He starts crying in this unbearable way. He's wailing as if he's hungry. I have a lot of puppies in my house. When I hear them, I immediately think, oh, poor things, they must be hungry. Right? So there's something which jagta hai na. So she was crying and crying away. And Kali, in the middle of her bloodthirst, she stops. And she turns and she sees this child. And then she has this matritva that is washing over her. This maternal instinct. And she goes and she picks up that child and tries to quieten him. She kisses the child on the head. And then she takes the child to the breast. And like Krishna, who took the poison out of the breast of Purana, you have Shiva, who takes the anger, Krodhagni, out of Kali to her breast. He takes the milk of sustenance, of Shakti, but also all the Krodhagni is taken out of her by his suckling at her breast. And then, of course, Shiva also knew his limits. He showed his true form. And then, to appease the goddess, he starts dancing the Sandhya Nanda for the goddess. And then she also becomes very happy and she starts dancing with him and so on. But now her bloodthirst has gone and the world is safe. Right? Now, this is a very important myth in terms of what it signifies. The signification is multiple, is manifold. One is that it is looking at the way in which the local, it suggests the way in which goddess cults are being subsumed under the canopy of the sectarian traditions of Shiva and Vishnu. And especially in the case of Shiva, you have several goddesses who are mentioned. So it's not just Kali who is created, but we also have along with her yoginis who are created, matrikas who are created, who are all going to help her. And these matrikas and yoginis, they have very Sanskritic names, but even just by analyzing those names, yeah, that the one who has the face of a bear, who is a cat, things like that which indicate that there is something more complex happening over here. These are local, maybe tribal, totemic, cultic traditions that are being transformed through acculturation, what Vijay Nath talked of. But what else are we looking at? We are also looking at the way in which the trope of the ideal woman vis-a-vis the woman who is despicable, who is not to be emulated, is presented. And here Kali is that other, the other of the ideal woman. The ideal woman is Gauri, is Parvati, but she herself will not go. She has to come out in the form of Kali, and only then this task can be completed. And the way in which the description, you can see how racially, or I mean race is the wrong term, but how color is being used, is being invoked. Even when we say Varnashrama, after all, we are talking about color. Varna is color. Yeah, so the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras, so you have the white, the golden, and the last is the red. Right? So you have this way in which color scheme is used to talk about that which is unacceptable. The same time, in the Puranas only, you have this concept of gunas that are taught of. Sattvic, Rajasic and Tamasic. Some gods and some characters are sattvic. Some people are Rajasic and some is then brought under control by adoption. So it's a very interesting way in which the mythology is presenting how women have to be, or how the feminine may be conceptualized, the ideal feminine may be conceptualized in society. And the last myth is that of Jeshtha, again using the same trope of the ideal versus the woman who is not to be emulated. And here Jeshtha, in the Samudra Manthan, which we hear of for the first time in the Mahabharata, then it says she comes out before Lakshmi. And that is why she is Jeshtha, she is the elder one. In different parts of the country, especially in the Deccan and in the extreme south, also in Gujarat and in some parts of eastern India, Jeshtha Devi is still worshipped even after the Puranas are describing her in a negative manner. What is the description that we have of Jeshtha? Jeshtha is born from the Samudra Manthan, but Lakshmi is the purified one who comes out. She comes with that complexion of Amrit itself. Whereas Jeshtha is one who is associated with the negative elements of the Samudra Manthan, like the Kalipurna Vishnu. And Jeshtha in her appearance is ugly, not in the way Kali is. Here she is a fat, stocky, big-breasted, big stomach woman. Sometimes I often think I am looking in a mirror when I read these stories. But you have this kind of a description where she's like this large woman who is, not presentable, not personable. And that she talks loudly. She goes around butting in where she shouldn't. And then one poor sage, he ends up marrying her, Dusara. And this poor Dusara is a good guy because he's a Brahmin sage. He wants to chant the Vedas, he wants to take Shivanama, he wants to go to the house of Brahmins who are performing Vedic sacrifices and all. But this Jeshtha, whenever he would take her along, she would start hitting her ears and her head and making odd sounds when she would hear these chants. And so Dusara is at a loss about what to do. And then he is advised by the gods to just keep her away from the Brahminical society. Let her be at the edges of settlements. And that is where then Jeshtha's temples are found across the early medieval period, at least up to the 10th, 11th century in South India. There are numerous places where there are shrines of Jeshtha and images of Jeshtha, like this Pallava image that we have of Jeshtha, where she is this fat woman and then she has two children. Also one with a bovine face, one boy and the other a girl. And in many instances she is also shown holding a broom in her hand. In some ways, in the Shitala images also, Shitala Mata images also, she is holding a broom. So this may have been some kind of an early agrarian cult that had come up, that is now being appropriated, but it's also being marginalized within the religious tradition in the Puranas. But look at the presentation of the myth by invoking ideas of what is the ideal feminine and why Jeshtha doesn't fit into the ideal feminine. Now, this is therefore one of the important things about the Purans, that on the one hand, they present certain examples of domestic bliss. They present on other occasions examples of violence towards all categories of people, including women, who do not conform to the harmonical norms. And then you have narratives of this kind which suggest that there is a cognizance, there is an inclusion, but this is not something that is approved of. And this is the power of the ideology. This is the manner in which the hegemonic idea to the household, to her husband, and that the woman always has to subordinate her needs and her desires to that of her husband for the betterment of the household, for the welfare of the household, and do that for the welfare of the society and even the universe. Thank you.
The floor is open for questions.
Let me start by thanking Professor Mahalakshmi and congratulating all of us for this absolutely erudite, mesmerizing lecture. It covered, I think, from the Purana to Ramshi. I don't think so. I have many lectures which can actually travel this terrain, and in between we have had periods of Purana and Pradhanamai and the Grantham also. So thank you so much, Professor Mahalakshmi. This has been a wonderful insight. The floor is open to questions if there are any questions. Yes.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Vijay Nath and I'm a third year student at SC.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Vijay Nath and I'm a third year student. So, my question or like kind of an observation is very wrong because I understood it that way. So it's like what fascinated me the most was Kali, which you mentioned that she was, she turned into an extremely destructive woman. So I kind of linked it that with that female race would be very, very destructive and hence needs to be controlled, which further, proves the idea that the ship became like in a form of a completely child, and when she heard that sound and she could not, control that motherly urge in her. So which further extends the point that a woman, be it like how graceful she is, in the end she has that motherly instinct in her. And also again, the last thing which you mentioned, that when Shiv dances, Shiv sucks her breast and unka anger wo aise suck kar leta hai. And then he dances for her to appease her. So it's like I kind of understood that way that it is kind of this particular incident, this particular anecdote is further, वो एक जो argument है ना men are controlling women, उसको बहुत strong कर देता है. Like men are controlling women और उसके बहुत ज़्यादा तरीके के creative examples दिए जाते हैं. This is one sort of that. Like they are just controlling women and hence women rage is meant to be controlled, and in the end she has a motherly instinct in her. Whatever happens, वो जाएगा ही जाएगा. So I'm sorry to come as wrong, very wrong, but I think I just understood this.
Any other? She give us some questions. Yes, that are back there. You can come up and try to go in.
How
Hello, am I?
Session. I have two questions. First is when we talk about the binary between the binary that we talk about in the beginning of the lecture between a particular woman and a Purana or a woman who is outside the norms. When I teach the Tantra Shastra, and there we do have a reference to three categories of women. The woman who is inside the house, then the public who is outside, and it talks about the third category about the family, woman who is in the liminal spaces. So, is there something like this that you have encountered in your reading of Puranas and other literature? And the second question is about, again, related to the idea of particular that we see in Puranic literature. We see something, at least I see in my reading of texts like this little garden, in which we have Kanani story in Tamil literature. It's a little garden. We see sacred chastity and mentioned. So is there some kind of connection and acculturation that is happening between Sanskrit texts and Tamil literature in the first millennium? So if you could talk about that one.
Questions, and they also allowed me to elaborate on maybe some things that I couldn't, although I've taken so much longer than I think was the scheduled lecture time. The issue about Kali's characterization, that it seems to fit all the stereotypes, right? That's the point that you were asking. Yes and no, because Kali, as I said, the myths themselves might change in different contexts. Now, the way in which Kali appears in the Markandeya Purana, in the Durga Saptashati, that is in the Devi Mahalakshmi, is quite different from the way in which she appears over here. Here, her agency as an individual actor is mentioned. And in the Devi Mahalakshmi, she's coming out specifically in the context of the killing of the demon Raktabija. So, although in both her love for blood is presented, what we find is that the myths themselves might be different or varied. Like the Darupana episode that I mentioned. Actually, there is another story about the Daru. This is the forest where Shiva goes to take refuge in, or shall we say, he's just wandering aimlessly because he is so distraught. He has lost his mind, he has lost his senses after the death of Sati. So he goes there, and then you have the same thing happening with the Rishi Patnis. They are unable to follow their Pativrata Dharma because they just overcome with desire for his beautiful form. So you have similar elements, but the context of the story, why that story is being presented, would be the reason why you have the narrative moving along certain paths. In the case of Kali over here, the Early Purana is a very interesting text because it is not merely Puranic in character, it is also Tantric. And especially the Pashupada tradition of Tantricism is something that we can see in the Purana. Now, in the Tantric tradition, the making of the mandalas, the inviting of various divinities to come and occupy spaces on the mandala and so on is there. And there are goddesses who are being invited to come and sit over here. How did Tantricism emerge? That's again a different story. But essentially, if we look at Tantricism, it's coming from possibly a very different kind of tradition of worship which celebrates the divine through certain physical offerings. So those and through certain offerings which in the Brahminical tradition are that you have it, but just before this you have the descriptions of the various mantras that are to be used in the mandalas that are to be created. Is it because of that? We don't know. Actually, these Puranic compilers, it's very difficult to say that they had this specific reason for placing the stories in this manner. It's not necessary that there are connections between the stories. But at another level, Kali as a divinity is already known in different regions where the Brahminical religion has found a place. And let us think of something like South India, which is a very vast region, coming from the Deccan, Western Deccan, going down into the Deep Peninsula. You find that Brahmanas are being settled into these regions, temples are being built. There are Vedic Brahmins also who are known from these regions, but the temple Brahmins are also Brahmins who are bringing the Puranic and epic mythology into the region. And Kali then becomes a very interesting figure through which many local deities can be assimilated into that figure. Just like, as I already mentioned, Durga also provides that kind of a generic name and figure representation for assimilating various kinds of local deities. In my own work on Tamil goddess traditions, I have tried to show how this interaction and integration and assimilation may be seen. It is of course something that is never closed as a system. It cannot be a closed system. Religion, especially, but also in other aspects of culture, we cannot say that it's a closed system that is being created. There will always be openings and newer elements that will come. But Kali is used as that figure. Why do I say it's not a closed system? Because as Kancha Ailaya has argued in an excellent paper called My Goddesses Are Not Your Goddesses, something like that. Am I right? I mean, I don't know, somewhere you have come across it. My Goddesses and Your Goddesses, something like that. It's a lovely book. It's a volume edited by Rajesh Sundarajan. And in that, he talks about how, from the Brahminical perspective, there is an assimilation that is taking place. But what is the Brahminical system also doing? Despite the fact that it is supposedly incorporating and assimilating the local communities within the caste system, it is in the lower orders of the caste system that they are placing them. And therefore, those are the people who cannot enter into the temple. So, they are not going there to worship their Kali. If at all any assimilation is happening, it is in the minds of the Brahmanas, who are the keepers of this tradition. The local people are still praying to their Vanampechi, to their Kotravai, Kandiman, the local goddesses who are there, who are known by different names, and maybe there is already a correspondence or an association with the Sanskritic tradition that is there. But the manner of worship tells you that even if there are correspondences in name, maybe even in representation. Now, across the tribal belt in that sense being assimilated, but the way they are assimilating is not completely in the way in which the Brahminical system is talking about it. So certainly the characterization, and that's why therefore the characterization follows certain given tropes, rather than trying to give more complex kinds of visions or views of or representations of the goddess. Now, as far as acculturation and women's agency, I think that's really a wonderful question. And I think this is something that many scholars have pondered upon, that women, especially in religion, seem to find some sense of moksha, of liberation, of nirvana, of salvation. And yes, I mean, there may be certain normative ideas founded in the grammatical tradition by the middle of the first millennium BC itself of Kama, Dharma, and Moksha. And in the Tirupura, you have the Trivargas, that is of Dharma, Kama, and Artha, that is propounded. So very clearly there is a give and take between the northern grammatical Buddhist Jain traditions and the Tamil tradition. It's a very strong and rich tradition that is known to us from the Sangam literature. Is the idea of Pandavese chastity coming from the northern understanding of chastity? No, I don't think so. That's my reading on the basis of a study of the Sangam poetry from the earlier time period, where women in particular were seen as being very powerful. So there is this term called Anangal, which means some kind of dangerous sacred power. And this power is there in women as well as in goddesses. It is especially there in women who have given birth, after childbirth. And so, there are references to how these women you should not hang around these women. The men should stay away from them because they are dangerous at this point of time. So clearly there is an early tradition, but also there is a way in which Brahminical ideas are also coming in. Shastric ideas are also coming in, which are tying these two notions related to women's menstrual cycle, and therefore, so there is that attempt, but it never goes completely, it never goes in the negative direction except to suggest a very strong, dangerous power that women have. In fact, the anthropologist, the sociologist Susan Snow-Wadley, when she did her field survey in Tamil Nadu in the 80s, she brought out a book. Professor Vinay Srivastava is one of those who told me that it was one of his favorite works. Her book was called The Powers of Tamil Women. And why? Because it is there in the folklore, it is there in the Tamil literature, it is there in the Sanskrit literature also. But the idea that this is something that can be harnessed so that it benefits the family. It's not that the Sangam poetry is not patriarchal. There also you have patriarchal ideas that are there, but it is still a tribal society that is reflected in the Sangam poetry. So you find a greater agency, a greater flexibility in terms of the position of women.
Greater heterogeneity also.
Later you find that there is a shift from that time. Thank you so much for this.
Their wait in time. So even if you overshot your way, I will now ask the to wait most of the time.
Esteemed guests, teachers, and audience, I, Durga Acharya, President of the Heritage History Association, express my profound gratitude to each and everyone for making today's event possible. I extend our deepest appreciation to our speaker, Professor R. Mahalakshmi, for delivering a thought-provoking lecture that enriched our understanding, and our special guest, Mrs. Nidhi Nag, for gracing today's session with her presence. To our principal, Professor Swati Pal, thank you for providing us with this opportunity to organize such an informative session and also for your unending support. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to our library head, Dr. Nivedita Sharma, along with the admin staff, especially Avinash sir, Randhawa sir, Vinda ma'am, Jayprakash sir, Gurpreet sir, and Ramani Priyas for their efforts and support. My sincere thanks to our association in charge, Dr. Natasha Mondi, teacher in charge, Professor Soumya Gupta, teacher coordinators, and all the teachers present here. Thank you for your efforts in making this event a memorable one. A big thanks to our student body for the meticulous planning, coordination, and commitment in ensuring
spite of the fact that I'm a tired and retired professor of history from the Department of from this very college. Thank you so very much. So this is not the first time. Every time an event happens, well, I think I'm the only one of the retired people who is present here. So thank you very much. Before I really get very tired and being retired since a long time, thank you all very much. And thank you all, thank you Mahalakshmi for inspiring me to write piece on patriarchy. I always work in Punjabi folk songs. I worked on getting a Punjabi folk song and all that. So this time I took up another project, which I will present soon if I can give the opportunity. It's again women and the same topic of women and patriarchal norms, but this time through Punjabi songs, Punjabi proverbs. So I have collected about 588 proverbs, 170 men, and the rest on 471 related to women. And also a small piece on, there's a folk song which are much Jakri, Haryani's folk songs. Jakri comes to the word wanted, Jakar. So I have collected some of those, the protest songs, actually. Jakri songs, protest songs by women. I've always mentioned without the mic. Thank you very much.
But how did this go?
Thank you all very much. And next time, after that, of course, if there's a session on Sufism or Sufi poetry, well, I'll be there. Thank you very much.